Do you want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! But you're on a budget and don't know what to play? Well, look no further, because in this video I'm going to bring you the top 5 best budget decks for the February 2025 competitive format. How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about budget decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! What the best decks are in the format at that price point of $100 or less. I've got the top 5 here, but I also have some pretty brief shoutouts as well for some really solid decks. Now, I understand that budget for a lot of people may not be $100 or lower, it might be $50 or lower, or even lower than that, and that's completely okay. If you guys want to see a video where I go over the top 3 or so best decks at every single price point, $30, $50, $100, $150, then I can go ahead and do that as well. Just let me know down in the comments and by leaving a like on the video. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a pretty expensive game. You look at the best 2 decks in the format right now, being Rizal and Malice, and both those decks are easily at least $400 or $500, which is a lot of money for most people in the community. That being said, there are ways to compete against those strategies with decks that are going to be significantly less expensive. Now, obviously, these decks do have to take some concessions where they say, you know what, instead of playing that 3rd copy of Triple Tactic Thrust, or even playing Triple Tactic Thrust in general, you're going to play a different card altogether. They can't play Fualos, they can't play Perulia, they can't play the Fiendsmith cards, and that's completely okay because we have a ton of great alternatives. And if you want to know my thoughts on a budget deck that I didn't talk about in this video, let me know down in the comments. But with that being said, here are the top 5 best budget decks for the February 2025 competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats. Starting off at number 5, we have Crystron. Now, Crystron is one of the best decks of the format, there's no denying that. But that's when you can use cards like Crystron Citri and Crystron Quarian Gandrax, which we just can't afford at the price point that we've set. But the deck is incredibly strong and puts up one of the most insane endboards in the game even without those 2 great cards, including cards like Cyber Dragon Infinity, FA Dawn Dragster, the ability to synchro summon on the opponent's turn, and Crystron Cluster as well. The deck is able to take advantage of one of the best going second cards in the game today, being Forbidden Droplet, because it wants all of its cards into the graveyard to activate their effects and act as starters. For example, if you send a copy of Smyger or Sulfefnir to the graveyard to activate Forbidden Droplet, not only are you negating your opponent's cards, but you're also getting access to a full 1-card combo that the deck can offer. Now, for the deck list that I'm showing you today, we are missing some pretty notable cards like Citri and Quarian Gandrax, and if you can afford those cards, go ahead and add them in. But we're also missing cards like Infinite Impermanence, because it's $7 a copy, and that would bring us over our budget. And I was debating between saying, are we going to include a hand trap like Imperm or a board breaker like Forbidden Droplet? And in this particular deck, because Droplet is so incredibly powerful, you would prioritize that card over Imperm. But if you do have Imperm, go ahead and add it in over other cards like, for example, Book of Eclipse. Crystron is a great deck that'll keep getting better with time and as you invest more money into the strategy. But because we're not playing cards like Citri and Quarian Gandrax, it falls at my number 5 best budget deck. But at number 4, we have Spright. Now, Spright is a great deck as well and has a lot of things that are going for it. It's able to build an insane endboard as well with a ton of negation pieces, including Spright Red and Carrot, as well as awesome cards like Totally Awesome as well. But the deck does have a few weaknesses. Notably, it's pretty weak to a card like Mulcharmy Fualos and Mulcharmy Perulia. One of the reasons I really like Spright is because the deck is very consistent. You have so many ways to access Gigantic Spright, which gets your entire combo online, and it also turns off one of the best hand traps in the game in Nibiru. It's not a perfect deck by any means, but because of the price of the engine, you can actually afford to play Ash Blossom and Infinite Impermanence, which are 2 of the best staple hand traps in the game today. And if you're a new player who has 0 cards to their name, you may want to pick up Spright because you can get access to all these staples as well as a really powerful engine for this current format. I also want to shout out Mirror Mage of the Ice Barrier along with Swap Frog. Both of these cards are really good because they get you access to Totally Awesome, which is one of the best endboard pieces in the entire deck. But if you're looking to take this deck list over here and make it better, there isn't a ton more that you can actually do. You want to pick up more staples like Forbidden Droplet, for example, but other than that, the deck is pretty good to go. You maybe want to add cards like Triple Tactic Thrust and Talons as well because there is a very heavy hand trap format going on today, and those 2 cards are pretty good against opposing hand traps. That being said, in the hands of a dedicated pilot, Spright can do a lot of really good things in this current format. Moving on to number 3, we have an OTK strategy in Millenium. This is the Exodia deck and it is so much fun. It breaks boards pretty effectively, and because of all the non-engine it plays, it's able to really OTK quite easily. Almost every single one of your main deck engine cards gets you access to Millennium Ankh, which is how you summon out the unstoppable Exodia Incarnate. This card is absolutely insane. It's a negate, which is great, but it also is the way you OTK in this strategy. The downside is you do have to play the 5 Exodia pieces, which is a downside a lot of the time, but if you just so happen to draw them all, you win the game. There are a few other advantages to playing this strategy. First of all, it's one of the best decks at utilizing Dimension Shifter, and while Shifter is not the best card this format because decks like Rizal and Malice don't really care about it too much, but it does make Malice a little bit weaker, and it really hurts the Fiendsmith and Mitsurugi decks that are running around as well. So if you can use Shifter, you don't really care about it, you can OTK your opponents. On top of that, you don't need your normal summon like at all, so Lava Golem is a great card because most decks are ending with at least 2 monsters on the field. And if you're made to go first, you can set up an end board with cards like Secret Village of the Spellcaster and Exod Fires of Rage. So you can stop your opponent from using any spell cards, but you can also set up a way to destroy all of their cards on the field. And additionally, because you don't need your extra deck almost at all, you can fill it with a ton of Ultimate Slayer targets that are going to get you more value. And looking at the side deck for this list, you're going to notice there's Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood, which is a really interesting card. Most of the time it's used as a way to gain life points and win a game in time. However, in this strategy, you're boosting up your own life points, which will give your Exodia Incarnates the ability to attack for even more damage. The deck is really cool and can play around most hand traps, because something like Millennium Ankh isn't actually negatable by a card like Ash Blossom, so it's really hard to effectively hand trap in the right places. And unfortunately, it's not the most consistent deck in the world because you do have a good chance of drawing at least one of your 5 pieces of Exodia, which do absolutely nothing in your hand. You'd rather see your board breakers or your combo pieces to be able to get the ball rolling. But if you're looking for a deck that can compete against the best decks in the format that you're gonna have a really good time playing, then look no further for Exodia Millennium. Before I move on to our number 2 and 1 best budget decks, I want to shout out 3 other strategies. The first one is going to be Labyrinth. Labyrinth is a great budget deck. There are so many really cool plays the deck can make, and because it's a really solid control deck, you're able to recover your resources quite effectively. The entire Labyrinth engine is very affordable, and the only really expensive cards right now are going to be your really silver bullet trap cards. For example, Destructive Daruma Karmic Cannon, and if you really want to play it, Dominus Impulse. But you can get away without playing those cards. It's not a perfect deck by any means, and it does have quite a few weaknesses. The good news is, most people aren't expecting a lot of back row heavy decks, so they're not siding for Labyrinth in the current meta. The next deck I want to give a shout out to is going to be Goblin Bikers, which theoretically has a really good matchup against the Rizal. But in practice is not really the case. In theory, you can get rid of all the Xyz material from a Rizal detonator and make it really easy to beat over, but that's not always going to be the case. And when going first, it's really hard to set up a super effective end board through all the hand traps in the game today. And even when you do set up a really awesome end board, it's nowhere near as powerful as all the other decks in the format because you're not playing the best cards in your strategy, which aren't even part of your archetype, being the Fiendsmith cards. Goblin Biker is a really fun deck, and I would highly recommend that you give it a shot, but it's not going to be blowing your mind for a budget strategy. And the final budget deck I want to shout out is actually going to be a surprise inclusion. It's going to be Yubel. Yubel is actually a budget deck right now. Did you know that Nightmare Thrones are only $15 a copy, and Phantom of Yubel is about $8 a copy? There is no other card in the entire strategy that is more than $5. Sure, you can play Varudris, but you're probably going to cut that because of budget reasons, and the deck is able to really consistently put up a very scary end board. The reason why it's not in my top 5 though is because the deck is so weak to Perulia and Fualos, which are going to see so much play in this format. If your turn just ends when you get hit by Fualos or Perulia, then you can't really effectively play that deck in the current format. That being said, if you're interested in playing Yubel down the line, I would highly recommend picking up the core because it is very cheap. And if you want to play it in general and you really like the archetype, then by all means, it's going to be a great choice and you're going to have a lot of fun. But moving on to our number 2 best budget deck, we have none other than Melodious. Now Melodious is a really cool deck with an awesome gimmick about it that gives it a leg up on its competition. Not only do you have a ton of amazing one-card combos including Ostinato and First Movement Solo, but you also are one of the only decks in the format that can effectively play Herald of the Orange Light, which is just another hand trap that's not once per turn, and it negates other hand traps, which is amazing. Melodious is a pretty good combo deck that has a lot going for it in the format. The biggest weakness I would say is that it's pretty weak against cards like Droll and Nibiru and the Bestials, and those are all seeing play in this format. But you do happen to play Crossout Designator, which can deal with all 3 of those if you really choose to, and Herald of the Orange Light can definitely deal with all 3 of those cards as well. It's also able to set up some really cool end boards, including Flowering Etoile, which is a non-target bounce to the hand for as many cards as you have access to. It also is able to get you to rank 4 monsters, including Baguska and the insanely powerful Abyss Dweller. Dweller is great in this format because decks like Crystron and Mitsurugi all deal with the graveyard, and if you can use Dweller on those decks, you're going to be in a really good spot. And one of the biggest advantages of playing Melodious is that the engine is tiny. It's only 20 cards for the actual engine, which gives you 20 more spots for non-engine to stop other decks. And for a strategy that is as low power as Melodious when compared to decks like Ryzel and Malice, you really have to use your non-engine very effectively to compete in the format. And that's just one of the reasons why I have it in my top 2. But that brings me to my number 1 best budget deck, and in my opinion, it's not even close how good this deck is compared to all the other decks I've mentioned so far. At number 1, we have Tenpai Sky Striker. Striker Tenpai, Tenpai Striker, whatever you want to call it, is incredible. There is so much going on in this deck. You're easily able to fill up your graveyard with a ton of powerful spell cards which give your Sky Striker cards their bonus effects. Engage can draw a card, and Widow Anchor can steal a monster, which is really good at breaking boards. And because you keep thinning your deck out with Upstart Goblins, Engage, Chicken Game, and so on, you're able to easily draw into one of your powerful Tenpai Dragon monsters. If you find Tenpai Dragon Chundra, Pydra, Genroku, even Sangan Kaiman or Summoning, you can OTK your opponent even through Pot of Prosperity. But make no mistake, this is a going second base deck, and if you don't draw all the powerful board breakers and anti-meta cards you're trying to play, you're going to have a really hard time OTKing through a full Malice or Ryzel board. And don't forget that your opponent can make you go first when they want to, so don't forget to side in cards like Book of Eclipse and Heatwave, which can be activated to stall out the game and make you survive. But that's also where you're going to play cards like Hieratic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres to be able to get extra interruption on your turn 1, but also act as a way to help you Black Rose Dragon your opponent's end board during their turn. In my opinion, it's really not that close when it comes down to what the best versus second best budget deck is. I believe that this strategy is one of the top 5 or so best decks in the format, and it just so happens to be budget as well, which is great. But there you have it, that's my top 5 best budget decks for this current format. Obviously, each of these strategies is missing some key notable cards in their decks. For example, there's no Citri or Quarian Gandrax in the Crystron deck, you're missing cards like Infinite Impermanence and other strategies, and even in the Tenpai deck, you're missing the Raging Phoenix OTK as well. But don't forget, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not a game you're going to be picking up and playing one singular time. You're going to play this game over and over and over again. And as you get more time and more income coming in, you can spend a bit more to be able to upgrade your decks to make them more competitive. And I cannot wait for reprints to cards in the Fiendsmith engine, the Mulcharmies, and so on, because these are all great cards that I hope everyone eventually gets access to. But let me know down in the comments if there are any other budget decks I didn't talk about on this video that you want to hear my thoughts about. I'll also be bringing you a budget deck tier list in the near future, so let me know decks you want to see on that tier list. Thank you for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all next time.